know, I don't really like singling out anybody who works here as doing better work than anybody else because I feel like everybody here puts in a good effort. But Chaz has really been above and beyond. This is episode 102. Episode 100 was a cliffhanger. Episode 101 didn't get great numbers. Looking at the numbers, it was not what I expected. As cliffhangers go, it was less who shot JR and more who's JR? Kristi Noem is the governor of South Dakota, not North Dakota. Someone wrote in angrily, those are two different places. I mean, sure, but like, not to New Yorkers. The daguerreotype was invented in 1839. John Adams died in 1826. Noted. You know what I think the most interesting thing about the day John Adams died? Same day as Thomas Jefferson. July 4th, 1826. Two of our most influential founding fathers died 50 years to the day after the adoption of the Declaration of Independence. They died on the same day. Murder-suicide. Guess Adams thought, like, Jefferson ripped him off on a revolving chair. And then right after, he's like, my friend, what did I do? By the way, we're submitting episode 94 for the Emmys. First appearance of Birdbane. I really, looking back at him, I also, 82 was tight, but it is the one we all agreed. We're all in agreement, so let's see how we do. Speaking of Birdbane, someone wrote in, I listened to the entire Taylor Swift album and didn't hear the Birdbane mention. Am I missing something? I'd say you might be missing everything. Looking forward to your comment next week. Can't find anything online about this Jefferson Adams murder-suicide. Deep state cover-up? Question mark? Had an answering machine in Monday's closer look. It was Trump droning on. And then I took out the tape. It continued to drone on. And I took out a hammer and smashed it up. And a bunch of you said, if you take out the tape, wouldn't the message stop? That's what I thought. We don't have a true story. We don't have a ton of time to get props because Sal turns in the closer look script like a minute before the show starts. But he did give a heads up on Monday that we needed an old-timey answering machine. And this is just a shout out to the props department. They basically found one on eBay in New Jersey and then obviously didn't have time to have it shipped. And somebody drove out to New Jersey to get it. And I just think it must have been both so exciting at first for whoever was selling it. When he turned it over, he must have been like, oh, I'm really, I'm proud of this. I get a lot of hard time. All my buddies are busting my chops because I keep these babies, I keep them, refurbish them. Beautiful, this works like new, and they're all like, you're crazy, who's gonna buy this? And then so to get the call today was very special. Very special. What are your plans for it? We're going to destroy it for entertainment. With a hammer. Also, the amount of you who told me I was wearing safety glasses, not safety goggles, leads me to believe that like 85% of jackals are shop teachers. We often reference Kinko's on the show, and every time we do, the jackals are up in arms. Because they always tell me FedEx bought Kinko's in 2004. They were FedEx Kinko's, and then in 2010, they dropped the name Kinko's entirely. So, look, I keep using the name Kinko's in scripts, and I'm going to continue to because I have a real nostalgia for Kinko's. There's two reasons I love Kinko's. The first is that when I was doing small improv shows in Chicago in the late 90s, we would always go to Kinko's and we would print out flyers for our show. And, they would take them and we personally would sort of put them up on telephone poles. I used to staple flyers to telephone poles in Chicago. I would put them on cork boards at, bars. And so it brings me back to a time that was a very exciting time. And the other reason I'm nostalgic for Kinko's is the local one in Chicago that I went to was right next to an adult bookstore called Kinky's. And a lot of times, guys would they would sort of try to keep their heads down, and they would go into the Kinko's accidentally. And then they'd try to pretend like that's where they were going, just weird guys in trench coats. And they wouldn't want to admit, they obviously were supposed to be in the Kinky's. And so it'd be a lot of like, oh, can we help you, sir? It's like, yeah. You got any of that fancy paper for resumes? Okay, so don't do that in the special. We've been on this one for a few weeks. After doing a George Bush impression, I said I had a C- Bush. You all got filthy with it. One person even wrote in to say their captions read C- nice Bush. At which point I said doing my A+ Borat impression. Then another you wrote in to say that when I did the Borat last week, their caption said Seaman Ice Bush. No, it didn't. Let's let it go now. Hitler was not a vegetarian. He was at one point on a cabbage diet because of a health issue. I guess he had a rare medical condition where the ends of his handlebar mustache kept falling off. I know we don't like him, but that's nothing to laugh about. Put all that work in. Wax it up. I said, thou shalt not kill shouldn't be 6 on the 10th commandments. That my stand-up brain tells me you would either open or close with thou shalt not kill. One of you said 6 is actually good because it's the top of the second tablet. You sound like a promoter. I said Neanderthal. Was told it's pronounced Neanderthal. The original fossils were found in the Neander Valley in Germany. Tal is the word for valley in Germany. That was an interesting comment. The follow-up comment to that, somebody commented on that comment, and that made me think, because Neanderthals are our closest extinct human, relative. And I think when we learn about the past, that's important, but I think it also helps think about the future. And so in just 3 words, somebody commented on this, and I haven't been able to stop thinking about it. They said, nudes in bio. Corrections is wildly innovative. I don't have to tell you that. But, sometimes it's hard to come up with new ideas. So we're just going to steal old ones. It's time for a new bit. Seth repurposes a joke a jackal sent in as a Karnak the Magnificent punchline. This was, you were asking earlier. This was hermetically sealed, kept in a mayonnaise jar on Bob Howard's porch since earlier this afternoon. Crickets. He was the king. Crickets. What did Kristi Noem's kids hear when they called for their dog? People were critical. They thought I was going to unload on the graphics department because we had the McWolf is back joke. It was a joke about a new McDonald's sandwich called the McWolf is back. It's a Golditch's 10th The McBlank is back joke. Whenever one of these gets submitted, Bays says, the McGolditch is back. But people said, oh, he's going to go to town on this, because it's got a wolf's ear. And obviously, like, a McChicken doesn't have, like, a chicken part. A beak. Came up with one. I wasn't a good improviser. So I think it's okay, because I don't think you want to say the McWolf is back and then show something that looks like a sandwich people will want. So I'm okay with the ear. I think that's a good job by the graphics department. Talked a lot about Doug Jones, more than I ever thought we would. And yet someone said, who is Doug Jones? Not all of us are Americans, so we don't get all these jokes. You know what? Being American is hardly a passport to get all the corrections jokes. You got to tick a ton more boxes than just born in the US of A. I mentioned the famous ballerina Pavlova, who had a dessert named after her. I said it was her namesake dessert. I should have said her eponymous dessert. Namesake is when you give your name to a person. Eponymous is when you give your name to a dessert. So you don't really need to learn it, because you almost never have to use it. I also said they try to keep ballerinas live for the amount they get tossed in the air. And I was called a troglodyte, their words, for thinking that ballerinas get tossed in the air. And someone's like, you're thinking about cheerleaders, not ballerinas. But, look, maybe at Lincoln Center they're not throwing them in the air, but Kenny's been taking me to this off-license ballet place, and those girls are getting chucked. And they're good. They shot a girl off the balcony in a cannon, and she landed on her toes. And they're doing all the ballet stuff. Pas de deux, pas de trois. Kenny says that's extra. It's time for our next installment of Celebrity Baby Teeth. As you know, this is a serialized reading of the sketch Celebrity Baby Teeth, and I have it here in a book. And Lottie said, why'd you open it to the middle of the book? And even Showmaker was like, since when do books start in the middle? And I was like, maybe you've never heard of a preface? Shoemaker was so embarrassed. You should have seen his face. Also, it's a super long preface. That's why it's in the middle of the book, because Reese wrote it. Here, sorry, this isn't Celebrity Baby Teeth, but a little bit of the preface. Someone had to fight for the writers, and that someone was me. Jermaine had written a great piece, and it was my job to convince Seth, Shu, and Bays it was worth being in the show. Hillary had production questions, and I had production answers. She rolled her eyes when I entered, and I could tell it was her frustration that not all the writers were like me. My phone rang. I could tell from the caller ID it was my agent. I was nervous, but I still clicked answer. I'll never forget the words he told me. Fines is in for the menu. All right. And now page 2. Celebrity Baby Teeth. For a segment titled Celebrity Baby Teeth. Might tell you something about yourself. Well, let's proceed. First up, let's take a look at this lovely set of baby teeth that belong to none other than actor Jude Law. Wow. Just look at these perfect baby teeth that were once inside Jude Law's mouth. Now you're undoubtedly wondering, why are we looking at Jude Law's baby teeth? What reaction am I supposed to be seeing? what reaction am I supposed to be having to seeing celebrity baby teeth? How? And we'll leave it there. Feeling like we might have made a mistake on celebrity baby teeth. All right, well, everything's going great in old Correctionsville. See you next week.